Hello, everybody. My name's Mark Smith, although I'm known as GD2K nearly everywhere online. Greetings from Edinburgh. I originally came up with this talk title before COVID-19 hit, and I would have loved to have visited Argentina, and instead I'm sitting at home in Scotland with a webcam. And not only that, I'm giving a talk called How to Get on This Stage and What to Do When You Get There. And there's no stage and there's no here. But I'll make do as best I can. So first, I'll talk about why I'm giving this talk. So this is my first Nadella, and I couldn't think of anything nerdy to speak about. But I do know something about public speaking, and I really like encouraging people to begin speaking at community conferences like this one. I'm a developer advocate for MongoDB, and as part of that, my job is to educate and inspire developers with what they can do with MongoDB and to speak as the voice of the developer within MongoDB. And normally, when there isn't a worldwide pandemic problem, I'd be speaking about different topics at one or two conferences a month. And I'm not an amazing speaker, but public speaking over the past few years has changed my life. And so I really like to spread the word of how great it can be. And as part of this job, I've traveled all around the world and given talks in many places. It's been awesome. And in the past few years, I've been hosting the Lightning Talks at EuroPython and PyCon UK, among other things. And my predecessors, before I got the job, used to fill the time by telling jokes. But I don't know any jokes. And I looked up jokes online and they weren't very funny. And I didn't think I could really deliver them and get people to laugh. And so I thought, how am I going to fill this time in between these 5-minute talks while people are plugging in laptops and finding out that the projector doesn't work? So I thought about the things that I'm passionate about, and I realized that I should make it my mission to encourage people to give a lightning talk, because if people give lightning talks and they have a good experience, then potentially they will submit full-length talks for the next year for the conference. So they're just a really important way to get new speakers into the conference, which is just really important for the community in general. So this talk is really me turning some of my little public speaking pep talks into a full-length talk. So I hope you enjoy it. So how do you give a talk at a conference? Well, at a high level, there's basically 5 stages. You submit a proposal, which will be accepted by the conference. You write the talk. You practice the talk, which is an important step. And then you perform the talk in front of the audience. And then afterwards, you bask in the glory of a job well done and the admiration of your peers. But that's not really the whole story. So let's break it down into a little bit more detail. So the first thing you've really got to do is decide that you want to give a talk. And I'm not going to cover this right now. I'm just going to assume that you're going to be so inspired by this talk that you've already decided that you want to give a talk. So once you've decided that you want to give a talk, you have to work out what you're going to talk about. And this is a really difficult thing for many people, including myself, because it's really relying on inspiration. And inspiration is something that's very difficult to control. My biggest tip would be to keep a notebook, because you never know when you're going to be inspired by a new idea. And if you forget that idea, then you can't write a talk about it. So every time you come up with an idea for a talk, write down a note in your notebook or your text file or your note-keeping app or your Google Doc or wherever's best for you to keep a running log of ideas. Write down the bad ideas as well as the good ideas, because when you come back to them at a later date, when you're actually trying to work out which talk you're going to give, you might find that it's not such a bad idea that you thought it was in the first place. So what can you talk about? Well, you can teach from experience, both good and bad experience. If you have a story to tell about something that went well or something that went badly, many people are often interested in your experiences. Bad experiences, things that you messed up but learned from, are often even more important than good experiences. So it doesn't have to be, we did this thing, everything went perfectly, and then ended up being brilliant. You can fix a bad talk. So if you have seen a talk, maybe online, and you felt that the speaker could have approached the topic from a different way that would maybe have been more useful to you or people that you know, you can write that talk, sort of secretly a fixed talk from another speaker. If you write blog posts or you've given a lightning talk, you can turn both of those into a full-length talk. A good source of ideas for giving a talk is often just to go to the website for the conference that you're going to speak at and have a look at what they want you to speak about. Here is the list from this conference, and there are plenty of ideas there, high-level topics. Some conferences will actually give you sample talk titles, and if you pick one of those, you already have an advantage because they're already proposed talk titles or topics that the conference organizers have decided they want to accept talks about. So you're already ahead of the game if you're picking something that the organizers have tried to communicate to you. And I'm on program committees, and I can guarantee that most of those topics or most of the talk titles that are proposed will never have a proposal submitted for them. I guess because people look at them and think, well, I'm not an expert in that area, maybe I shouldn't give a talk on that topic. Or they see it and think, it's in a list on the website, everybody's going to submit a talk about that topic. That is not the case. So definitely, if any of those titles or topics really stands out to you, write a talk about it or write a proposal and submit it to the conference. You've got a good chance of being accepted. If you you can ask on Twitter or mailing lists or Discord, or you can ask your friends or colleagues what they think you should talk about, because they will listen to you talk in the office or in the pub, and they will have a good idea about the things that you know or the things that you're passionate about, maybe better than you do. But in general, think about what story can you tell? What would you like to learn? What have you learned? What can you communicate to an audience? What can you be passionate about? So once you've come up with some ideas, you can submit a proposal. Now, usually I would recommend having a conference in the future that you want to submit a proposal to. That means you've got a date that you're going to be working towards. Make sure that there's plenty of time, and that will give you more time to think of ideas or develop your ideas before you submit the proposal. Yeah, it's just a good idea to give yourself some time. And here's the big secret about proposals to conferences. I'm on the program committee for a couple of conferences, and the truth is that about half of the submissions you get aren't very good. So don't submit a low-quality proposal. And if you follow the guidelines I'm about to give you, you'll have a good chance of submitting a good proposal. The key points are: spend some time on it, get someone else to read it through, make sure the outline makes sense, and make sure it describes what you're going to talk about. Don't keep things secret as a reveal for the day of giving the talk. So the first thing to do once you've got your high-level idea or your title is to write an outline. So there are many people have different ways of approaching this, so I'm really giving you my technique. For a 25-minute talk, I would put down 5 to 10 bullet points, or you can work with mind maps if you prefer working in 2 dimensions. These are really kind of the subtitles, the headings for your talk. And then under each one of those, write 2 to 3 sub-points that just expand on the idea a bit, so that you know you can talk about that high-level point for somewhere between 2 to 5 minutes. And then once you've got those bullet points kind of sorted out, reorder them if necessary, so they tell a story. So each part of the talk builds on the bit of the talk before. Once you've got this outline, it doesn't have to be set in stone. It's really just your proposal. You can usually change it when you're writing your talk if you need to, but you won't need to do any of that if the talk isn't accepted. So just try to get down your idea in a sensible format at this stage. So here are the top level points that I came up with for this talk. It was coming up with an idea, submitting a proposal, writing a talk, preparing to give a talk, and then actually giving your talk. So these were my top level bullet points. And once you've got those, you need to write a pitch. So this is, all conferences have different requirements for their CFP. So you should read those and make sure you follow them. But in general, it's 1 to 2 paragraphs, and you should make it as exciting as possible. These 3 exclamation points are here on purpose. You should answer the questions: what is the talk about? What broad topics will you cover? And why should someone come to see your talk? If you can make it dramatic or exciting, then do so. If it's a story about something that went well or went terribly or is just interesting, try to make that story front and center in this 1 or 2 paragraphs, because it will really pull people in and make them decide they want to read the description or just attend the talk based on the pitch. I usually run the pitch through an app called Hemingway, which is just a free web-based application. And it works with English, and it makes the language more punchy. It uses direct language, and it tends to take out a lot of the extra words that aren't adding any value. So this is my submission for this conference, and I'm going to go through it in more detail. So here's the elevator pitch. This is actually submitted as one paragraph, but I've broken it down into 3 sections, and I'm going to read it in full. Would you like to give a talk but don't know where to start? This talk will tell you why you should give a talk and how to go about it. I'll cover submitting a proposal, writing your talk, preparing to speak, and actually getting behind the lectern to thunderous applause. And you may notice that last sentence is basically the same as my outline, so I'm saying in detail what I'm going to talk about. The first sentence is really a pitch to filter the audience down to people who might be interested. So it's for people who would like to give a talk but don't know how to go about it, maybe would like some advice. And then the middle sentence actually expands on that a little bit and says, I will tell you why you should give a talk. So that maybe adds a little bit of mystery to the talk and would get people who otherwise aren't interested in public speaking to actually come to the talk and trying to find out what I have to say. Here is the full description. So you can see this is quite a bit longer, and this is important too, so I'm going to read this in full. I'm only kidding, this is way too long, but let's look at these headings in more detail. So these headings are the same as the outline. They're the first thing I put together for this talk. And then underneath each one of those headings, I've just added another couple of sentences to show the organizers of the conference that I can talk about each of these topics for about 5 minutes each, maybe a little bit longer. We're going to have to squeeze this talk into the time that I've got. And then finally, and this is the bit many people miss on the proposal form, is the notes section. So the previous 2 boxes are shared with the audience. They're used to sell your talk to attendees or possibly even sell the conference to people who might think of buying a ticket. The notes section is different in that it's only shared between you and the organizers usually. And most people don't fill it in. Maybe because they're not sure what to put in there. But really this is for you to communicate with the organizers anything you think they should know. So I've said here what my target audience, so it's targeted at new speakers and it's to encourage new speakers to speak at conferences, which I hope is something I'm getting across in the talk. So it's really just in case I haven't got that across in the description to the organizers, I've kind of explained why they should accept this talk, not just what the talk is. If you're giving a talk about maybe your company's product or an open source software product, it might be worth explaining in this box how your talk is not going to be a pitch for your company or your commercial product, and just sort of explain like what the audience is going to leave having learned after watching your talk. Try and give some confidence to the program committee that you are actually, at least at a technical conference, going to give a technical talk that the audience will be interested in. So now you've submitted your high quality proposal to a conference, you should prepare to be rejected. You're going to be rejected if you submit talks to conferences. I get rejected all the time. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And you usually get sometimes get feedback, but you usually don't, because the organizers, especially of community conferences, are very busy and they just don't have time to write an evaluation of your CFP proposal for every person who submitted one. A pro tip is if you want a higher chance of being selected, submit more than one talk to the CFP. Most conferences will only accept kind of your most appropriate talk, but potentially you should check that they're not going to accept more than one talk. You should make it clear to the organizers that maybe you're not going to get if you've submitted 4 proposals to one conference, you're not really prepared to give 4 talks in one day or 1 week of the conference. Now, the reasons for being rejected may be that your proposal wasn't very good. But this won't be true because you're going to follow the guidelines that I've given you. So you're going to have submitted a good proposal. So let's just ignore that. Something more subtle is that somebody else may have submitted a proposal on the same topic as yours, and it may have been slightly better than yours, and so their talk has been accepted instead of yours, and maybe they were only prepared to accept one talk on that topic. So that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that talk. It just means you're in competition maybe with one other speaker. Your talk or proposal may have been considered a bad fit for the conference. And again, you can usually do research to make sure this doesn't happen by reading the website for the conference and making sure that it fits in. If you've attended the conference before, you probably have a good idea for the kind of talks that are generally accepted for that conference. A secret of most program committees is that the organizers are really busy and they have a lot of proposals to go through. and potentially they just skimmed your pitch and it didn't excite them enough to read the description in much more detail. So maybe they didn't give you the time that you deserved for the amount of work that you put into your proposal that would have persuaded them. In fact, in detail, your talk was an amazing idea. And the only thing you can do to improve your chances on this is to volunteer for the program committee for community conferences. The more people who volunteer to help run conferences like this, the more time and detail people can spend on all the different aspects that make this conference great. And finally, maybe your talk idea just isn't that engaging to other people. And in that case, you might have to go back to the drawing board, change the focus of your talk, or potentially pick a different idea and put together a proposal on that. Remember, if you're rejected, you can submit to other conferences where it may be accepted, or even the same conference the next year. I've known this happen several times to friends of mine. So don't be dejected if you're rejected. If you keep submitting proposals to conferences, eventually you will be accepted. And the first thing you should do is confirm with the organizers, and then you can start working on your talk, specifically planning your talk. So don't forget about your talk until a week or two before the event. Make sure you give yourself enough time to spend working on the talk. They take longer to put together than you would think. So the first thing to do is to come up with a timeline. How long are you going to spend brainstorming and kind of filling out your ideas and really thinking about the detail of your talk? And then how long are you going to spend kind of writing the talk and putting together the slides and thinking about how you're going to present it? At this point, again, keep a notebook or a Google Doc or anywhere you can write down notes as they come to you, because you will wake up in the middle of the night with ideas that you can put into your talk. And then if you don't write them down, you'll forget them. And ideas that are forgotten don't improve your talk, whereas ideas that are remembered at least have a chance to go into your talk and improve it. So now we get to writing your talk. And this is really the hardest part. And all the speakers I know have different approaches to this. So I can't really tell you how to write it, but I can point you at some resources. The steps that I personally follow are to take that original outline that I wrote with all the bullet points and add more bullet points to it. And because I'm an experienced speaker now, I generally have an idea of how many bullet points it takes to fill a talk. I usually have too many, in fact, but I'll keep them in until I've built my slide deck. And then only when I'm starting to rehearse my talk and I realize it's way too long, will I start to cut out sections of the talk that I realize are weak once I start to say them out loud. Once you've fleshed out your talk outline, I usually end up with about one bullet point per slide. You can start to design your slide deck. Don't jump into this too quickly. And in fact, if necessary, start sketching out your slides on Post-it notes, if you could, especially if you can work manually, if you're better with a pen and paper, because as soon as you start to work in the computer, it starts to restrict the way that you work. So the longer you can keep away from thinking about your final design, the more creative you can be in the process. While I'm not really going to talk about slide design, I would just like to take a brief diversion from this inspirational talk to discuss bullet points. So bullet points are the default option in many presentation software packages. They're quick, they're really quick to sort of hammer out bullet points and then press return and put in another bullet point. They're really easy. You don't need to learn how to use the software very well. You don't need much skill at design to put bullet points into a slide. And they're kind of one-dimensional. They don't really make full use of this rectangle that we're working with slide design. So they're maybe not the most powerful representation of your ideas. And I think if we're going to be honest, they're kind of boring. They don't really bring much of an extra dimension to the things that I'm talking about. In fact, they're kind of notes for the speaker. They're notes for me, not you, in many cases. So they're perhaps not the best way to put together a slide deck. But if that's all you want to do or all you have time for, then do it anyway. It's much more important that you have the confidence to put together your talk and give the talk at a conference and share your story or your experience with the audience than that you're put off by the idea of maybe having to learn graphic design to put together slides. You'll see I am not the best slide designer. Most of these slides are bits of text with me talking. So don't be put off by the amount of work involved putting together a slide deck. I tend to think of talk content in terms of this graph here, with interesting at the top and useful at the right. And ideally, we're aiming for this quadrant. We're aiming for a talk that imparts knowledge. It's useful for a technical audience, but it's also interesting and exciting. And if you can aim for that, if you can hit that target, absolutely, you should do that. But it's also okay to be useful but not exciting. If you're not funny, or you find it difficult to even, especially when talking to a webcam, to express passion, people are still interested in the things you know or the things you've learned. So still put together that talk. This is a little less usual, but it's also okay to be useless but interesting. So you don't have to have huge amounts of knowledge in there, but if you can entertain an audience, there are a range of talks accepted for conferences, and so it's okay to pitch for this one. The quadrant you should avoid is this one, where you're not useful and you're not interesting. Definitely steer clear of that. When you're designing slides, there are lots of books and resources online. There's a website called Presentation Zen, which is also a book that I highly recommend. And so you can learn from other people. They will specifically teach you how to put together a talk and how to find your own presentation style. So definitely have a look at those. Once you've written your talk and designed your slides, it's time to prepare to speak. And this is a step that many inexperienced speakers don't spend enough time on or skip entirely. And I used to be one of those people. And it really comes down to one thing, which is rehearse. I usually rehearse my talks around 8 times before anyone sees them. It's a great idea to give the talk at work or at a meetup before the big event. And that'll give you a good idea of how long it takes to give the talk as well when you're under pressure and a bit nervous and maybe talking too quickly. And you can get feedback from other people that you've given the talk to. So in all ways, rehearsing or giving the talk in a smaller venue will give you useful feedback on your talk that will make the ultimate talk better. So now that you've prepared your talk, you've rehearsed your talk, you're ready to give the talk. And this used to involve flying out somewhere and going up to a stage. However you're giving the talk, turn up early so you have time to kind of calm yourself before you speak. Use the bathroom before you go. You'll still need to pee when you're speaking, but you'll know you don't have to because you've already done it. If you're giving the talk live, on stage, you can Google power pose, which is a way to stand on stage that projects confidence and will make you feel more confident. Beforehand, you can go to the bathroom and say affirmations in front of the mirror. Many speakers listen to loud music on headphones before a talk. And ultimately, when you step up to the stage and get introduced and applause, you'll be nervous, but you'll be prepared. And so your talk will be excellent because of all the work you've put into it. A thing that many new speakers are always nervous about is the question and answer session at the end. And a big secret that I will tell you now is that you do not have to take questions. You can almost always tell the room chair beforehand that you're not prepared to take questions. And that will just ensure that when you finish speaking, they don't go around the audience and take questions. But Q&A can be really useful for the audience. They're a chance for them to dig into your topic. So beware the non-question. If people are supposed to ask questions, if they stand up and make a statement, thank them and just move on. They're not expecting anything from you anyway. So I used to travel around the world. Public speaking used to involve putting my Viking helmet into a suitcase and getting a plane, usually via Amsterdam, and then taking selfies in the conference bathroom because there were little motivational posters saying I looked great. And then I'd be up on stage in my kilt because I'm from Scotland. And now we have the new normal. And so instead you get this. But there are some pros to this as well. It's cheaper. You can give talk conferences all around the world without having to leave your living room. They're easier to get to. They're still happening. We're still having conferences, which is a great thing. And many allow pre-recorded talks, so they're actually you can be less nervous. The cons are that it's difficult to be expressive in front of a camera, and it's difficult to simulate that community feel. If you want advice, go to YouTube and look for advice on streaming setups because people have been doing this for a long time outside of our community. So once you've given your talk, you now have the chance to bask in the glory of a job well done and the admiration of your peers. So to circle around to my original question, be part of the community. It's good to give back. If you've learned from a talk, you can do that you can give that to other people. It's a great way to meet other people in a conference. It's a challenge, and it's a way to learn new technical topics as well if you're learning them to give a talk. And one day, if we ever get the chance to travel again, I really look forward to traveling to a conference and meeting you in person and seeing the talk that you give. Thank you very much.
Estamos acá en el canal de Q&A, preguntas y respuestas. Aquí al lado mío lo tengo a Mark Smith, así que si me permiten, Mark es de Escocia. Voy a pasar a hablar en idioma inglés. Mark, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's so good to see you again.
It's so good to see you again, man. And thank you for giving your talk.
Just such a shame we're so far apart.
Yeah, it's a shame. This was your first talk south of the equator?
Absolutely. Oh, not south of the equator. I've spoken in Australia before, but my first talk in South America.
Right. Well, welcome. And to kick it off, we have a couple questions from the public. The first question is, do you think it's important to have an online presence to get selected? And what can we do to get more attention from the judges?
Okay, so if I'm being completely honest, yes. If you have a higher profile in the community, it's probably going to help you with certain conferences. But more and more conferences these days are doing anonymous selection. And so in that sense, your profile doesn't matter at all. And in fact, many of the program committees complain if people put enough information in their submissions to make them identifiable. You know, the idea is to make it as fair as possible. You should be selecting based on the proposal that was made. And I think that was really the theme of the talk that you just saw, which is like, make the best proposal possible. It doesn't matter whether nobody's ever heard of you before. If you make a great proposal, you're still going to go to the top of the list.
Yep, absolutely. Next question, how much time/days would you recommend we allocate to preparing the talk, and what is plenty of time?
Really difficult question to answer. It's a good question. It depends on the talk, really. So if you're giving a 5-minute talk versus a 30-minute talk or a 3-hour workshop, those are obviously going to take different times to prepare. It also really depends on how difficult the talk is. So sometimes the talk just writes itself. Sometimes you have an idea and it automatically fills up, say, the slot that you have, 30 minutes. And so those tend to be really quick to write, providing you know how to use your slide package to build the slides. You can put them together really quickly. It's just amazing when that happens. Obviously, sometimes that doesn't happen. And I've sometimes worked through the night as the time has got shorter and shorter and shorter to the time when I actually need to get on stage, because I just need to get the software working so that I can write the talk. I wrote an async talk last year for PyGotham that was an absolute nightmare to write. And it's one of the few talks I haven't been able to go back and watch. Normally these days I can watch myself to pick up things that I don't maybe do so well or that I would like to do better. This one I just can't watch because it was such a nightmare to put together, and I can only assume that it wasn't a very good talk. So it happens to everybody, right? Sometimes it just doesn't work. But I think that the emphasis again that I put in the talk after putting the proposal together was rehearsal time. That's the thing I think people underestimate. And the tip I gave was like 5 to 8 times through your talk, which sounds like a lot. And I've had people in chat before when I've given this talk say like 5 to 8 times. That's amazing. Like, I didn't realize anybody did that much rehearsal. If it's a 30-minute talk, 5 times through the talk is 2.5 hours, which isn't really a lot of time. Spread that over 2 evenings. That's really just over an hour per evening. Obviously, there's some time in between to sort of fix up any slides that you think aren't working. But it's not as much time as it sounds. And if I'm being honest, like the shorter talks sometimes are harder to write, because if you're doing a lightning talk that has to be fit in, say, 5 minutes, trying to squeeze what you want to say into 5 minutes can be really, really difficult. So that might take lots and lots of time going through and making sure that it actually fits in the time that you have.
Right.
So it really just does depend, but make sure you know how much time you want to spend going through your talk and make sure you have time for that.
Next question. In case you are not a specialist on the subject, but you dare to give a talk, and you cannot skip the Q&A, do you have some useful tips to face it?
To face a Q&A. So I would recommend, if you're not an expert and you're really giving a beginner's view, or even just a view of like what you learned while you were going through. So that's not necessarily a beginner's view. Sometimes that's an intermediate view, but it's like, this is a journey that I want to describe to you. If you tell people that that's what you're doing, then you can fall back to that in a Q&A. Also, I think I said this in the talk, you don't need to know all the answers. If somebody asks a question and you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I'd like to think about that. Can we meet in the corridor afterwards and have a conversation, or we can meet in the Slack with these remote conferences. So there's plenty, you don't have to answer the questions if you don't know the answer. But yeah, you will usually find that actually the questions aren't particularly deep. So if you've done the learning as part of building the talk content, then you'll usually find that you're able to answer at least half the questions that come up.
Right. And last question, you have about a minute. How many talks do you usually have ready to give at any time, and how often do you incorporate new talks?
For me, because I speak quite often, it's part of my job, I usually have 3 to 4 talks on the go, and I can sometimes pick one of the older ones out if I think it'll really fit a conference that I would like to speak at. But I never quite know when I'm going to come up with a new talk idea, so really the older ones sort of fall off the back of the queue as whenever a new one comes up. So sometimes I'll give those talks a handful of times over a year and then retire them.
Right. And we have time for one last question. This is actually more a question about you, but how come you don't have a Scottish accent?
That's because I grew up in Dubai, in the Middle East, and then moved to the south of England and only moved to Scotland 15 years ago. But for some reason, I've just never picked up the accent, which I think is a shame because the local accent is beautiful. My daughter, however, sounds completely Scottish.